I mean, what's Pro Football Focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Do you not understand that they are that way because you're Joe Flacco?
You just like to discredit things that people deserve credit for.
That you can't possibly be expected to defend that.
Talk about the game, Sam. So who cares about what people think about us?
Yeah, I like football season, all the things that go with it.
Welcome into the PFF NFL Podcast. Steve Palazzolo back with Sam Monson. That's right. Renner's gone. One and done. Sam's back. Welcome back, buddy.
Thanks, Steve. How's it going?
How's it going? Well, had a good show with Mike on Thursday.
Yeah? I haven't listened yet.
Yeah, you're probably not interested. It's the 2021 draft preview, so it's a little early.
Getting in there early. Yeah.
Yeah, just wanted to get his expertise, sell the preseason draft guide just a little bit. We have all sorts of preseason stuff, preseason draft guide, preseason college football magazine coming out. So all sorts of fun stuff with PFF Edge and Elite in the coming weeks. So we figured we'd give Mike a shot to talk some draft. But we're back here talking NFL, and guess what? It's late June, and we have some news to talk about as late Sunday night, Cam Newton officially signed a one-year contract with the New England Patriots. Fascinating offseason for the Patriots, right? I kept looking at it as like, hey, we get to get into the mind of Bill Belichick here. What does he think of the quarterback position? He has not had to make a serious decision at quarterback. Maybe one, the Jimmy Garoppolo draft pick. One serious decision in 20 years. Was he going to draft somebody, go free agency, whatever? And it looked like Jarrett Stidham was going to be the guy. And here they are circling back and grabbing Cam Newton on a one-year deal, a cheap deal. What are your thoughts?
A lot of people need to delete some takes over the previous couple of months about, what the Patriots are doing, what they believe in, what Stidham is, all this kind of thing. We might need to delete some as well. I'm not sure. I actually don't know what to make of this, to be honest. One thing that struck me is like how Patriots a move is this, though, that not that they signed Cam Newton, that they did it late in the evening on a Sunday, June the 28th, while everyone else is like, downtime on vacation doing nothing. And the Patriots finally go, let's just sign Cam Newton.
Yeah. And just like any other position, they just said, like, we'll just wait and find the value play.
So that's the thing, right? Is that I don't know that it necessarily means you need to throw all priors out the window. And, there's a lot of people sort of writing these revisionists. Oh, wow, they've substituted one MVP for another MVP. And how does the league keep letting the Patriots do this and all this kind of stuff? They basically just waited to the point where they're like, look, like at this point, the value is too good to turn down, right? Cam Newton is essentially willing to pay for free unless he plays a significant amount or, plays well enough to hit these escalators, max out at like $7.5 million. Like the absolute worst this deal can cost the Patriots is $7.5 million. And that's assuming Cam Newton plays well enough that they don't care that it costs them $7.5 million. So they've really just reached this point where they've said, we're not turning down this value at this stage.
I sent you something last week that was, it was essentially like advice to people in our industry about, how to advance your career, how to get ahead. And it was essentially like have really strong takes, right? Like all that stuff that is overtook ESPN 10, 15 years ago and has infiltrated our entire industry. Like just have some hot takes and it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong and just kind of go. And then you have me who says over and over and over again on the show, like, there's some nuance to this. Like, it's not exactly black and white. It's not this. It's not, there's gray areas to all this stuff. So like, that's me trying to describe Cam Newton, because every take right now is either like Cam is a former MVP, as you said, he's awesome, right?
It's not even
or
being described as former MVP. It's just MVP. It's like
MVP.
president. You're president
like being
until you
president.
die.
Yeah.
You're an MVP
You're just an MVP.
until you're gone.
Yeah, we can't call that was an outlier season that didn't mesh with anything else he did the rest of his career.
And was
so it's either
5 years ago,
right? It was one of his 8 years, and it didn't look anything like the other 7. So Cam, they either signed an MVP or they signed a bum who's been beat up and he didn't jump on a fumble in the Super Bowl. And he, wears funny stuff after games, and it's like, oh, he's not a gamer, he's not this. Like, there's no in between here. And honestly,
right.
Cam Newton, I think, is in between. I mean, he's got a cannon for an arm. He can throw lasers down the field. He's not as accurate. He's not on the top half of the accuracy spectrum in the NFL. So again, the people that are like, oh, Cam Newton can throw down the field, they haven't had that with Brady. Like, nothing further from the truth here, to be honest. Does he throw it faster? Yes. Is he a better downfield thrower than Brady? No. And then you have the other part of it with the run game. And this is, I think, probably the thing I want to see the most, right? Cam has been at his best when he's been a designed runner, right? There's not a better 3rd and 4th and 1 runner than Cam Newton, right? I mean, that's the guy, your short yardage runner. That's where he's maximized his value. He changes the numbers game. He's efficient running the ball as a designed runner. How much does Belichick and Josh McDaniels tap into that, especially on a 1-year contract? Are they just like, hey, let's go all in? It's 1 year. We're not tied to him long term. The negative part about potentially having a run-first guy is like the long-term effects, right? So do the Patriots even care with 1 year of Cam Newton? Do they just go all in with him and just run him like crazy?
I think what intrigues me, though, is the idea that he is somewhere in the middle. He is this middle ground, nuanced option between those two extremes that everybody's talking about. And that is strange to me, right? Because this first year with no Brady, the replacement plan, the succession, the future, it felt to me that you had one of two options. You either try and find someone you think can be a viable quarterback and win you Super Bowls now, this offseason, or you do the whole tank for Trevor thing and you position yourself for next year and you try and get the quarterback then. And, the idea of, well, why would they sign like a Teddy Bridgewater, right? Because that would put them in the middle of those two options. He's probably not a Super Bowl winning quarterback in his own right, and he's probably good enough that he keeps you away from the top of the draft next year. Cam Newton, again, feels like somewhere in between. Like, he is good enough to get you to a Super Bowl, but only when he's healthy and playing at that MVP level, which was 5 years ago. Now, we don't really know where he is health-wise or play-wise, because it's been so long with him playing banged up. We don't really know quite what he brings to the table, but it's probably somewhere in between those two extremes. So again, I'm kind of like, what is the plan here? I get that he's, a cheap throwaway option and the value is too good. I got a friend whose dad is like one of these sort of compulsive bargain shoppers, and he'll go out for like a bag of chips and come back with like a deck, cleaning device and a power washer and all these things. You'd be like, well, at the discounts they were offering, I couldn't afford to leave it in the store. And that's what this feels like, right? It's like the price this contract is, we couldn't afford to leave Cam sitting out there in the open market. But again, I don't know what the plan then is. Like, what are they doing? What are they actually trying to achieve here? Not necessarily this year, but for the next sort of 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, you said we might have to delete some takes and all that stuff. I mean, I don't know if it's deleting takes. I mean, you can only have an opinion based off what you saw, right? And the Patriots didn't draft anybody and didn't sign anybody, so the implication is that they probably have some sort of, appreciation for Jarrett Stidham's skills, and they probably still do. But I think it's just your point, and it's also like, let's go back through the history of the Patriots. Like, not everything has to be 6-dimensional chess, right? As soon as the Patriots didn't draft somebody or sign somebody, all of a sudden it was like, well, Belichick knows this is the only way to get Trevor Lawrence, therefore he needs to tank. When they signed Tim Tebow a few years ago, it's like, there you go. There's the Patriots short yardage runner, and there's the guy. They're going to take Brady off the field, and they're going to have Tebow, and they're going to make him into an all-pro. And it was like they kicked the tires on a former first-round pick. Like, that's all it was. It just happened to be Tim Tebow, who happened to have a ton of publicity and a unique game and all that stuff. Like, is this any more than like kicking the tires on a former MVP, a former first overall pick, a guy with skills that you can work around. And let me just go back to my original take was I don't think Belichick has tanking in him. That's what I had way back in the day. I thought he'll try to get an Andy Dalton, get a Nick Foles, get a Cam Newton, whoever it is, and try to win with him like we've essentially gotten to that point, I think.
Yeah, and the only difference I think before with, a Tebow and a Cam Newton is conceptually. Obviously, there's vast differences in terms of quality of quarterback.
I mean, there's a huge difference. Yeah, Cam has been way better. Right. Just to clarify before anybody questions you, Sam.
Yes. Saw that one coming, headed it off at the pass. But my point is, conceptually, the difference between kicking the tires on a Tim Tebow and kicking the tires on a Cam Newton is that previously you had Tom Brady, right? You had this baseline of we have probably the best quarterback in the NFL in any given season, and we'll just kick the tires on whatever else is out there and see if we can if we turn Tim Tebow into some sort of quality option, we can flip him for draft picks or whatever. Like, now you don't have baseline. You don't have a Tom Brady. You have no idea what your starting quarterback situation is because the other option is Jarrett Stidham, who has shown it's 4 NFL passes and one of them was a pick six. You've got Brian Hoyer, who isn't an answer to anything. And then Cam Newton is the alternative option. So now you're kicking the tires on a guy who, if he's anywhere near healthy, is by far your best option to start. And again, by far your best option to start, but probably not anywhere near his 2015 form because it's the only time we've ever seen it. So he's probably not the quarterback that brings you back to the Super Bowl just by being him. At which point, again, my question is what is the plan? What is the end game to succeed Tom Brady? Or do they, unless the plan is that they become like the sort of 1990s, early 2000 Minnesota Vikings, where they just substitute in a seasoned veteran every year and seem to take on an okay. The way the Vikings went to Warren Moon, Randall Cunningham, Brad Johnson, Jeff George, just kept cycling through them, and it was all fine because, they had the system, they had the receivers, they had the offensive line in place. They were able to do that. Now, the Patriots don't really have any of that in place, but maybe that is the plan, right? We just sort of cycle through guys that are viable.
So the Patriots don't have the depth chart there, but let's go back. I was on a Patriots podcast actually last week, and this is immediately outdated. It was what's your take on Stidham? I was I think Belichick is probably approaching this I know it was 20 years ago, but I took this 6th round quarterback and turned him into something pretty good. I made a pretty good decision with my 2nd round pick and Jimmy Garoppolo and flipped him, and he's turned out pretty good. There's probably something in Belichick that says, man, I've got a pretty good track record at identifying starting quarterbacks. Now it's 2 over the last 20 years. And who knows, does Ryan Mallett count as a 3rd rounder? He got Matt Castle, he became a starting quarterback, right? I mean, so they have a track record of identifying these guys. Does he, in Belichick's heart, does he believe that obviously he helped make Tom Brady a former 6th round pick because his coaching and the system and his coaches in this entire world, this ecosystem that they've created is good at that. And not only good at creating these players, but identifying the ones that will flourish within that system. And I certainly think there's a world where Belichick believes that. And then when you combine it with what we keep talking about, and Renner and I actually discussed this Thursday, the NFL, we said there's 28 to 32 legitimate starters in the NFL right now. There wasn't 5 or 6 years ago. Is that actually a viable strategy over the next couple of years if you truly believe in your ecosystem, your system, your program, so to speak, that you could just get the Marcus Mariotas and Cam Newtons and Jameis Winstons of the world and win?
Yeah, and I get like those Vikings teams. I don't know that it's crazy. I think now more than maybe ever, it's a plan that could work. You can also look at the sort of small sample sizes of games where Brady's missed and they've had to go to another option and say they've got a pretty good track record of being able to plug some players in there and still win. Like when they had to play Jacoby Brissett and when they had to play Garoppolo, when they've had to turn to Castle. Now, okay, what was it, 11-5 down from 16-0? You can look at that 2 different ways, but still, that was Matt Castle's first start since high school. So you can definitely make the case that they've been able to plug in quarterbacks and still win when they were this offensive juggernaut and when they were this really good side overall, which kind of brings us to, are the Patriots actually good enough of getting the best play out of Cam Newton anymore. This was you don't have to delete takes. You appear to have actually been on this all the way through. I honestly thought they might be positioning themselves for next draft, like to take the shot at tanking and get Trevor Lawrence and, resume the evil empire for the next 20 years. But I think this does change that, because there's almost no way that Cam Newton plays and is bad enough for them to be in position to draft at the top of next year's draft. But you do look at this and say, Cam Newton's now dealing with all of the same problems that Brady had last year in terms of supporting cast, because it didn't fix anything. Nothing was improved. And the only improvement is going to come from internal development, right? Like N'Keal Harry goes into year 2. Can he get much better? Mohamed Sanu isn't dealing with the injuries that he was dealing last year. Is he immediately better? Is Edelman able to flourish because those two guys are better? But like personnel-wise, it's the same, which is to say the worst receiving core in the NFL. And people were making this point that Cam Newton went 15-1, with the Panthers in 2015, and Philly Brown was one of their top receivers. It's like, yeah, but they also had Greg Olsen at the peak of his powers. Ted Ginn has been consistently one of the best deep threats in the NFL in his career, albeit one who was prone to drops, and he was there that year. So, they had some weapons. Like, it's never going to be this clean, but I pulled up the sort of cumulative or overall PFF grade of the receivers, all the receivers, tight ends, backs, wide receivers for the Patriots last year and the Panthers in 2015. The Panthers were over 80. It was like 80.6 or something, and the Patriots are down to like 72. So those were dramatically different receiving cores, even though the name recognition was similar, I guess.
Yeah, so let's discuss that for a second, because Cam, I dropped the whole he's a middle of the pack guy. He's a mid-tier guy. But we've also discussed before the style that those mid-tier quarterbacks can have, right? There's the Alex Smiths, there's the Derek Carrs on the conservative side, then there's the Cam Newtons and the Jameis Winstons on the more volatile side. So longtime listeners know that those volatile guys are just that, right? They are volatile. So that's why you have outlier seasons. You have Cam Newton's 2015, which when you look back at it, instead of referring to him as an MVP, you would say that is actually one of the biggest outliers statistically of the entire decade. And even grading standpoint from at PFF, that Ryan Tannehill's last season is in there. Eli Manning has a year in there. So these highly volatile guys. If you have a volatile quarterback and say like a N'Keal Harry, who's not great at separating, but he's got some ball skills and you could back shoulder him, and maybe that intermediate range where Cam's just going to, whip some lasers and stuff like that. Like if you stumble into the year where he's a little bit more accurate on those, you can get some high-end production there, right? So like Cam's volatility means that maybe he'll be a little bit better at taking it. Maybe he has a chance at taking advantage of some of these guys, right? At the same time, if he's not good and you don't have guys that are getting open for him, that could be a challenge. Now, there was the one year where they kind of brought Cam back down to earth, 2018. The last time we think we saw Cam healthy was the first 8 games of 2018. And we kept saying, look, he's not playing better, but he's definitely checking down a little bit more, taking the underneath stuff. His accuracy is still not great, but when Christian McCaffrey's creating after the catch and Curtis Samuel, like they had a shorter passing game. He had like 100 passer rating and all that stuff. Now, that was at a time when he was like 15th in the league in passer rating that year, but people who were looking at Cam Newton's numbers in a vacuum were saying this is a career year. And we were saying it's not. This is actually the system elevating him and him being a little bit more conservative. But we've at least seen him produce for 8 games in that style. Is that ultimately the style that they go? It's Edelman underneath, it's James White underneath, and they take a little bit off Cam's plate and kind of get back to that and say, look, just be the old game manager type.
My concern is that I don't think that anybody in that receiving core is a good fit for what Cam Newton does. Yeah. Cam Newton, so relive the Panthers iterations of the Cam Newton support plan, right? Plan 1 was let's get Kelvin Benjamin and Kelvin Benjamin clones, get these 6'5" guys Cam Newton can't possibly overthrow, right? Bad idea. Turns out that those guys don't separate. You showed me a thing earlier that Kelvin Benjamin was in the 0th percentile for separating against man coverage. Just can't do it. Cannot separate against man coverage. And what that means is, even though those guys might win, a reasonable percentage of contested catches, basically every single catch they have is going to be contested, because you're now forcing your quarterback to essentially throw at a bad picture every single play. He's never going to get that good, the ideal quarterback picture is he gets to the top of his drop, he looks up, and he's got a guy with separation, right? Easy read, number one, separation, throw him the ball, done. He's never going to get that now, because he's going to drop back, look up, and there's going to be a Kelvin Benjamin version with a guy draped all over him. And you now have to make that call of, well, is he covered, or is he like covered, but I can get the ball there anyway? Like, you're basically asking him to make a bad decision every single play. So it's just not a good mechanism. Now,
and in 1 year, in 2015, he made spectacular throws left and right, and it worked. It's just, that's not a sustainable model.
But also remember that 2015 season, that was when you had a speedster like Philly Brown. Yeah. You had Ted Ginn. You actually had some receivers that got the hell open, particularly deep down the field, that offset a lot of that. But my point is, that strategy is not a good one for any quarterback, particularly with ones that struggle a little bit in terms of accuracy. The Patriots, you were on this all last season. They may have the slowest receiving core in the NFL. Julian Edelman can get open, but only underneath and, in the sort of accurate area of the field that Tom Brady would always work. Cam Newton is not good at that. So Edelman immediately is less effective with Cam Newton as the quarterback than with Tom Brady. Mohamed Sanu is not a separator. He's not great at that. And N'Keal Harry, dating back to college, has never shown the ability to do that. So now who's getting open for Cam Newton in this offense, which was the same question as Brady last year. Maybe N'Keal Harry going into year 2 develops that part of his game. He's been working on footwork in the offseason. You've seen all these hype videos and all that kind of thing. Maybe. But none of these receivers, I think, are a good systematic, schematic fit for what Cam Newton does well, which is A, deep down the field targets, and B, occasionally make those big plays in the middle of the field that you need a good picture to be able to reliably target.
So I'm going through and I'm ranking all of the units of each team, essentially receiving, tight end, offensive line, all that stuff, doing team previews that are going to be out in the coming weeks. So I'm going through all the receivers right now. And it's funny, as I go through all of them, I try not to, view it through the lens of best case scenario, but it's the off season and you tend to lean that way. And it's a lot of well, if this guy takes this step and this guy takes this step, it's wow, this team, this receiving group looks pretty good. So I'll give you what that best case scenario looks like, right? Edelman's Edelman. He still gets open underneath receiver. He's fine. N'Keal Harry, as you said, there's a second step to his game, but even if there's not, contested catches plus yards after the catch ability, there's something to build there. Sanu perhaps is healthy. They did add Damiere Byrd. He's got sub 4.4 speed, so he could be the guy that gets open down the field a little bit. They add Marquise Lee, and I think between Marquise Lee and Jacoby Myers, you might have that other potential option who could, has a little wiggle and can get open a little bit, right? So in the offseason, when you're not comparing to the other 31 teams, on paper, it doesn't look terrible. The tight end class still has the tight end group still has massive question marks. They drafted 2 guys, Devin Asiasi and Dalton Keene, to go with Matt Lacoste. It is a slow offense with Damiere Byrd in there who's fast. That is what it is. But there's a scenario where a couple of guys bounce back. There's a little bit more health. And it's reasonable. But I think either way, we're still looking at Cam throwing to a subpar group of playmakers, which has been the majority of his career in Carolina.
Yes, that I think at least is the one sort of thing, that is in the plus column, is that at least it's not new, right? Cam Newton has dealt with this before. He has had dramatically subpar receiving cores throughout his career in Carolina. I don't think that 2015 one that a lot of people point to is a good example of that, but he's definitely dealt with some questionable receiving groups. My overall point is that A, I don't think this group is going to help him, and B, I think they're an unusually bad fit in terms of what it is he does, right? So you could have, even if you had a bunch of crappy receivers, if they were stylistically the right type of receivers, I could see a scenario where they actually worked well together. I think these are an unusually bad group of receivers, and they are stylistically bad for what it is he does well as a passer. The other aspect, though, that really intrigues me is the one you touched on before, is what do the Patriots do with Cam Newton, because I mean, he was Lamar Jackson before Lamar was Lamar in terms of bringing something genuinely unique to the table from a rushing standpoint, albeit, different styles, but that changed the game, right? You can't defend Lamar and the Ravens right now because he changes the numbers and he basically invalidates what it is you typically do on defense to stop the run. Cam did the same thing. You were able to run QB power with Cam Newton, and that fundamentally changes what it is you have to do on defense in order to combat that, which obviously always has the knock-on effect of opening other things up. So, but Cam Newton is now, however many years into his career, has dealt with significant injuries for a pretty extensive period of time. Like, he is breaking down because of all this. So do you continue to embrace what makes him unique on the basis that now he's 100% healthy? Do you say this is exposing him to too many hits and forget about it? We're dialing way back. We're going to make him a pocket passer who can move. Like, we're going to essentially ask him to be Aaron Rodgers, take off when it's there, don't when it's not.
Well, so Cam is a lot like Lamar in that respect too. Like, he's not a scrambler. Like, Cam wants to sit in the pocket almost too much. Right. He wants to sit in the pocket. Right. So a lot of people miss those points sometimes. They're like, oh, athletic quarterback, he just runs around and makes plays like it's, Madden, dropping back 15 yards and running around. Like, Cam's never been that guy. If there's a complaint with Cam, it's that he sits at the top of the pocket too much and just likes throwing in a phone booth, so to speak, instead of creating that little bit of space. I think that's one of his weaknesses through the years. But I think the Patriots and Belichick look at it as, we got him for 1 year. I mean, I think they might use him the way that, running backs are used, where it's like, all right, run him as much as we have to, and then he's walking at the end of the year, and we'll see what happens. Like, this is one of those scenarios where I don't think, he's not locked up for 4 years. You don't have to protect your franchise quarterback. You don't have to develop him. He's had that peak year, and in that peak year, he was one of the more efficient runners in the NFL, and that was a big part of his game. I think if you're going to recapture that magic, that's a part of it. Now, his health is a concern for this year, but I don't think his long-term health for the Patriots is a concern. Not like brain injuries or anything like that, but I don't think they care if he takes a few extra hits this season.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly don't care long-term, but we're reaching the point where these hits are having a pretty acute impact in his play. Like, he's played a lot of games in recent years where he shouldn't have, or at least the level he was able to play at because of the injuries he was fighting through made him a much, much worse quarterback. So I think there's a very real concern, not just that hey, these injuries he's picking up are going to hamper him a few years down the line. It's like, you might play him and he'll make it through, but the last 8 games of the season are going to be crappy Cam Newton because you've got the guy battered. The one other thing that I think is worth touching on, I've seen people argue this, do you envisage any scenario whereby Jarrett Stidham actually beats out Cam Newton for the starting job?
I do. There's
what would need to happen?
I think it would be look, nothing is 100%. So I say, yes, I do. It would be like that. The Patriots truly do.
Be a fox,
really,
Steve. Be a fox. 100%. All in.
Jarrett Stidham is the starter. They invested in him in the 4th round. They believe in him. He had 4 good throws in the preseason last year, and that's all they need to see. That's all they need to see out of Stidham. They think they're going to make him the next Brady, or at least the next Garoppolo, or at least 40%. The next Castle.
That's 40% of what Bill O'Brien needed to see before he handed Brock Osweiler a $72 million contract.
See, and Stidham's a deal. He's a steal on his rookie contract. So the scenario would be they truly think Stidham has a chance to be the long-term play, and Cam Newton is just a business decision. The same way picking up Kyle Van Noy as a free agent is a business decision, or picking up any other player at any other position is a business decision that's good for right now. It was the right value, as you said. They found a bargain, they picked it up, but the plan was all along Jarrett Stidham. And unless he tanks in whatever kind of training camp they have, then it's Jarrett Stidham's job. That would be the scenario. The other scenario is there's so little training camp that Cam Newton can't pick up the offense or doesn't have time to pick up the offense or whatever it is, and Jarrett Stidham happens to be the guy, and Cam becomes the guy at some point if Stidham fails.
So let's assume for a minute that some form of normal training camp is going to happen, right?
Yeah.
How do you imagine them going into that camp? Cam
50-50.
50-50 with Stidham as the sort of like on paper starter, starter. Stidham gets like the first reps and it's 50-50. And then ultimately it becomes pretty obvious that Cam Newton is superior to Jarrett Stidham and the thing tilts. Okay. So the scenario for Stidham to actually win that job would have to involve outplaying Cam Newton during training camp for the Patriots this year.
I think so. Or there's no training camp and Stidham's the default
and he gets it by
because,
default, right?
Yeah.
And so then the discussion would be, all right, Stidham opens the season as starter effectively by default because Cam Newton hasn't had a chance to take the job from him yet. Then the question would be, how long does Stidham last before he plays himself to the bench? Bearing in mind that last time he played himself to the bench after like one throw.
One throw, right? It was a garbage time pick six that brought the Jets back into the game and they had to put Brady back in. I mean,
They actually sent him out there in mop-up duty and had to pull him again.
If I'm betting, obviously it's on Cam Newton to be the starter, but I don't think it's a crazy scenario to think that they do believe in Jarrett Stidham and they are taking the long. There's still a chance that they're taking the long-term approach that we need to know if Jarrett Stidham could be our guy and need to give him a shot.
I think again, like the idea of Newton landing in the middle, like either way, I think that still holds true. Like, the Patriots are in the weird, luxurious position now of being able to make that long-term development deal that never happens anymore, right? The idea that quarterbacks do actually take some time to develop, and you need a few years to get a guy used to what he's supposed to be doing at the NFL level. Like, players like Russell Wilson have just ruined that for everybody because now you expect them to get it day one. And some of them do, but there's probably a group of quarterbacks that still would be good if you gave them that old school 3-4 year development plan that doesn't exist anymore. So the Patriots are in the weird position of actually having a shot at achieving that. You had Stidham last year, you can potentially have him this year, and you could get 2-3 years down the line before you ever have to put him out there as a starter. It's possible. I'm just fascinated by the groups of people that always seem to, exist on Twitter when these things happen, right? It's like, there's obviously the group that are like, well, how do the Patriots do it? MVP for MVP, it's cheating. And then you get the other group that are like, well, until they actually announce he's a starter, Jarrett Stidham is the starter and Cam Newton's just come in as competition. You're like, well, look, it's like he may not be, the reigning MVP, but he's got the advantage over Jarrett Stidham. Come on.
I can't even deal with the Twitter takes anymore, man. It's rough. I mean, it really is. Everything needs to be as polarizing as possible when it comes to, this trade or that move or whatever it is. And, look at the Patriots. They got a guy that can throw down the field now, or, like you said, it's still Stidham's job. Like, there is no in between on any of this stuff. I'm trying to ignore the noise, Sam, have my own on the fence takes. So, here's the one other thing I think we need to tie the bow on this. Let's land the plane. AFC East. Okay, because there's a lot of takes out there. Oh, finally, the Cam Newton's the best quarterback in the AFC East again. He's coming off 3 straight years grading in the 20s for us, ranking in the 20s. Yes, there was injury late in season in 2018. Last year was only 2 games, but he hasn't been actually like really good in a while. He hasn't even been good from a throw for throw standpoint for a while.
Right. On the other hand, the AFC East quarterback situation is not good.
Oh, it's poor. And I know. And we're not going to do bingo this year. We're not going to mention the Buffalo guy. We got people upset. We keep mentioning them. We're not going to mention the Buffalo guy. But Buffalo's got the best roster, I'd say, in the AFC East. I still think the Patriots defensively, even with all their losses, because of what they have in the secondary, they have just as good a shot as Buffalo of having a shutdown defense. So could they duplicate like what they did last year for the first 8 to 10 games? Maybe not exactly, but they could. That's going to keep them close in the mix. This definitely bridges the gap from my original take. I think it's Buffalo's division now. Like, it's much tighter between, I think, the Bills and the Patriots.
I will say that I don't think there will be a more upset team than the Buffalo Bills if this signing happened, because
they wanted to see what Jarrett Stidham had. That was their best shot, right?
Oh,
Let's see what Stidham
well,
is.
not just that, but like, I mean, Buffalo, the specter of a Cam Newton being healthy enough to be a starter for the Patriots all season long should have been dangerous enough to Buffalo that they should have signed him as a backup just to stop that from happening. But I don't think Cam Newton wanted that. Like, Cam Newton's thing was very minimum, I want a chance to compete to start, right? Obviously, he wanted a starting job. There aren't any of those out there. So next best option is, well, I want at the very minimum a shot to compete with the guy who's starting. So that's what he's got, right? He's signed with the Patriots on a 1-year deal that is effectively a backup contract, but he has a shot to actually compete with Stidham and take that starting job. He doesn't have that shot in Buffalo. Like, they're not going to let him compete with Josh Allen. Whatever we think about Allen, they believe in him, believe he's the future. They're not going to risk that with a Cam Newton, at which point they can't sign him to keep him out of the clutches of the Patriots. And he signs with the Patriots. And now you're dealing with this. It was our division to lose. And suddenly there's very real competition again, because assuming Cam Newton is healthy and gets anywhere near back to what he can be, like, that's a viable concern for Buffalo. So yeah, I don't imagine there's a more pissed off team in the NFL that this happened than the Bills.
I love that as a concept, though. I mean, that goes back to my whole, like, accumulate quarterbacks and all that stuff. Like, the idea that if the quarterback truly moves the needle that much, how valuable is it? Say, like, the Raiders signing Marcus Mariota. What if they're in their meeting rooms back in February? They're like, listen, we're going to sign Marcus Mariota just so the Chargers don't get him, just so we have an edge within the division, just so that this team in our division doesn't get this guy who's an upgrade. And then they have to either sign Tom Brady or go with Tyrod Taylor / Justin Herbert. And that's an advantage for us. But, like, that decision to sign Marcus Mariota as a backup could be way more impactful than your other top free agent signing as far as, winning your division. I think it's a viable strategy. Now, to your point, there's the human element of, like, would Cam Newton accept a backup deal to Buffalo and all that stuff? But if there was a team to pull it off, it's Carolina North, right? I mean, that's the whole Carolina regime up there. And bringing Cam in, like, they could have potentially pulled it off. But you have to balance the question of, wait, do you not believe in Josh Allen anymore? Is Cam Newton actually the starter? Is he competing for the starting job?
Don't give me
quarterback
controversy concerns, you mister. I never care about that crap.
I'm saying you have to answer those questions. I don't think it affects your team, but you do have to answer those questions. So I love it as a concept, though.
Point all along.
Like, from a New England standpoint, if they had drafted Lamar Jackson back in 2018 instead of Sony Michel, right? They still could have won the Super Bowl in 2018 and maybe not had to deal with the Ravens last year and Lamar Jackson and lose, the number 1 seed in the NFL. Like, there's little things like that along the way. Like, if Bill Polian actually put his money where his mouth was back in 2000, he said he had a first-round grade on Tom Brady. He should have drafted Tom Brady. Drafting Tom Brady would have led to more Colts championships than, whoever else they selected in 2000. So that's what you should have done.
So my favorite thing to come from all this Cam Newton stuff is that it has re-highlighted the career wondery that is Chase Daniel. Because Cam Newton and Jameis Winston's contracts combined are earning less than Chase Daniel is being paid this year to be a backup.
Come on, really?
Yes, correct. Chase Daniel is the king of dollar per pass attempt in the NFL, in NFL history. Would you like to know the current tally?
Yes, I would.
So for Chase Daniel's career now, 11 seasons, he has earned $34.3 million, right?
And around for 11 seasons?
Yeah. He has attempted 218 passes in that period, meaning he has earned $15,738 for every time he's thrown the football in the NFL over a decade.
That is amazing.
Isn't it?
What an insurance policy.
That guy's career is just something else. Like,
Chase.
we talk, the thing is, so, I've been railing against these guys that literally can't be on the field. The Matt Castles of the world, late career Matt Castle, the Chad Henneys, those guys like that are literally wasting a roster spot because you cannot put them on the field. So you have them there just for off-field meeting room, mentorship, whatever it is. It's not an on-field football reason. Like, Chase Daniel is not the worst backup quarterback in the world. Like, he's actually, you could play him, you can win games. He isn't horrendous. It's just hilarious that he's earning that much money for that role.
It is amazing, right? And if you're going to spend that type of money on him, absolutely, you would spend the money on. You should want to spend the money on a Jameis, a Cam, or a Mariota in a backup.
Absolutely.
Role.
I mean, that's the other thing is that he's earning an absolute freaking fortune, and these guys are struggling to get contracts.
And that's also, I see when I am scouring Twitter, I see people like LOL, stupid Raiders. You spent a ton of money on Marcus Mariota. You could have waited it out and gotten Cam Newton. Like I am all in on the Marcus Mariota as a backup quarterback deal. I think that those types of deals are a no-brainer. They're a no-brainer for $8 million, $9 million. I think it's absolutely worth it for all of the reasons that we've said: insurance, rejuvenation to his career, or even just keeping him away from the Chargers. All of those things, I think, combined. It goes back to the Jalen Hurts thing. Jalen Hurts has this list of reasons why having him as a second-round pick could really pay off. And even if none of those come through, he's still worth the insurance policy that you paid for, right? So I think all of those things, I don't think you can overpay or, overdo it with having too many quarterbacks or, getting them from all these different types of ways.
I don't think it makes the Tannehill deal look bad. I don't think it makes the Dalton deal look bad. The only quarterback deal that I think it makes look bad is the Bears trading for Nick Foles.
Yeah, I'll buy that. Sure. Absolutely.
Because that is A, an egregious contract that the Jags wanted rid of in the first place, and B, you traded something to make it happen.
Right.
While that's one where you can point to a very viable alternative that costs less and is probably better. Instead of trading, giving up something to take on an egregious contract for a guy who might not be any better than these guys, you could have had the free option for less money, who's probably better. That isn't good.
Completely agree. You don't need to give something up to go get Nick Foles. You really don't. Something's missing there. All right. Good stuff, man. Put a bow on that Cam Newton discussion. Let's have a season. Let's have some fun and see all this stuff play out. Now, over at PFF.com, you've been grinding during your off week. Were you just grinding research or what for this big article?
No, so we ended up with a kind of collaboration piece where Timo did a lot of the legwork with the research, and then I put it together last night. Nothing says, getting back to work on a Monday more than being up the night before writing the article that's going to go on the website. So it's basically our buddy Josh Hermsmeyer wrote a piece for 538 that was looking at the types of pressure and how important they are, and we've kind of done bits and pieces on that in the past. And his sort of overall takeaway was, sacks are incredibly valuable compared to the other types of pressure. And he was looking at it through a lens of the percentage of drives that they stall, that they stop, right? If you get a sack and a drive, it ends the drive there. And that's obviously really good for a defense. And one of the things, so it was massively different, but one of the interesting things is, sacks skew third down heavy, right? Something like 40% of all sacks happen on third downs, and on third downs, any basic pressure is more likely to result in a sack, right? Because third downs are different. And in theory, that's the last down before you got to kick the ball away. So things change a bit. The quarterback is more likely to hold the ball a little bit longer because he's trying to make that play happen. Everything just sort of changes a little bit. So it's more like, and obviously a sack on third down immediately ends a drive. There's no chance of redemption down the line. So it was like, well, that's likely to skew those numbers a little bit. What happens if you neutralize the down and distance, the scenario, and say 1st and 10 passing situations? And ultimately the same thing happens. The impact of the sack is slightly less. It jumps from, so if you get any sack on a drive, the chance of converting a first down become 20%, right? 1 in 5. Yeah.
It's huge.
But that factors the fact that 40% of all sacks are on third down, right? So 40% of those immediately crap out the drive. But if you make it on 1st and 10, that number almost doubles. It becomes 38%, I think, almost 40%. But the difference between a sack and other types of pressure, the gap actually widens. So they become more impactful versus any other type of pressure, because the same thing is kind of true with, a hit that forced an incomplete pass on third down is effectively bringing up 4th down and kicking it away as well. That's essentially ending the drive also. So when you take that away, even an incomplete pass on 1st or 2nd down, you've still got a chance to pick that up on 3rd down. And NFL passing offenses are so efficient now that they can overcome that most of the time. So every other type of pressure is well over 50%. It's most of them are above 60% in terms of still converting on the drive, but sacks are massively impactful. And probably more, I think we've used this sort of rough equation of 2-to-1. You know, a sack is worth two other types of pressure, 2-to-1. I think it's probably more than that. But what it did start to highlight is you basically can't predict sacks, right? You can predict them better than looking at previous sacks. So the fact that Shaq Barrett, right? Shaq Barrett, sack leader, 20 sack type season. The fact that he did that this year has an extremely small effect on his chances of doing anything like that next year. The number of pressures he amassed this year and his pressure rate and his PFF grade have way greater predictive power than how many sacks he's had in the past. But none of them really like move the needle because pressure is so relevant or so dependent on coverage and the opposing quarterback and those kinds of things way more than it is like the actual pass rusher. So this idea of sacks are paramount, sacks are what you should be chasing, this is true, but you probably can't identify them enough to make it like the reason to go after a guy.
So to a point, for years we've been saying, hey, sacks don't predict sacks.
Right.
We kind of got to that conclusion. You're adding a couple other layers of nuance and detail to it. I started doing a study last year, which was trying to go back on every NFL sack, and I made it through a few weeks or whatever. I'm going back to finish it at some point. And I was saying, okay, what's like the first order reason for this sack? Is it, I would say this is coverage if the first read was essentially taken away, right? If a quarterback had a chance to get rid of the ball, but it was covered, then, you know, coverage was, say, the first reason, or it was a completely blown blocking assignment, or it was just the offensive line, defensive line interaction, whatever it might have been. There was only about 30% of those that was just like pure defender won, quarterback had no shot. I mean, just 30% of sacks, never mind 30% of pressures. And right in that 30% mark was probably coverage first. And I had first order and second order, you know, so some had, you know, a little bit of both. And a big chunk of them, as we know, are on the quarterback. And that goes back to that whole, like, defense doesn't matter concept that our analytics guys have come up with. And, you know, I hate, you know, as a fence sitter, Sam, you know, I don't like saying defense doesn't matter, you know, because it doesn't convey the right message. But the point that they're trying to make, if I could just interpret their defense doesn't matter words, it's that it's easy, you know, the offense is going to help you predict the defense a lot more than you think, right? That the defense's production is far more based on the offense than anybody would have you believe, especially a defensive coordinator. So that comes down to the quarterback holding the ball, the receiver's not getting open, the cornerback actually covering the receiver. You know, so it's really good stuff. Some of it's intuitive, some of it's, you know, like more extreme maybe than we even expected, that like non-pass rushing factors are so strong in actually predicting sacks or the inability to predict sacks.
Yeah. So I think it's an awkward thing, right? It's not that defense doesn't matter, and it's not the coverage.
Of course not. It's never that black and white, Sam. Of course not.
And it's not that coverage is just inherently, you know, better exclusively than pass rush, right? The idea is not that you should never covet pass rush or that you should only ever target coverage and forget about pass rush. It's just that, like, we've always known that those two have like a symbiotic relationship, right? Coverage impacts pass rush and pass rush impacts coverage. And, you know, it's been used, that gets used even in broadcasts a lot. We talk about coverage sacks, right? The quarterback had nowhere to go. That's a coverage sack. And we've seen the reverse happen, right? There's been bad coverage where legit pass rush has bailed the play out, right? Let's say a coverage bust or a guy trips and falls in the secondary, but the pass rush gets there just before the quarterback can get rid of it and the ball falls incomplete. So the two impact each other. But when you start to look at the numbers, what becomes interesting is how much the coverage and the quarterback, because again, those two have a sort of symbiotic relationship, how much those impact the pressure numbers. So you would think that, all right, the quality of the pressure, like how, because not all pressures are created equal. So Aaron Donald winning at the line in like 1.5 seconds and bearing down on the quarterback should, in theory, have a much bigger impact than a guy slowly working his way there and getting somewhere in the quarterback's face after like 4 seconds, right? but it doesn't. When you look at like how quickly the pressure arrives, there's almost no measurable impact, regardless of how fast it got there. The only thing that does make an impact is if you look at pressure that was charged to the quarterback as opposed to anything else, right? When the quarterback is charged, that has a much more severe negative impact to the offense, which again indicates that coverage is the thing driving this, because there are going to be bad quarterback plays in there as well, right? Like the Baker Mayfields from a year ago, where he's just bouncing from a clean pocket, causing problems, pressure, it's on Baker, the end, right? But most quarterback charge pressures are going to be essentially related to coverage. It's like, crap, I have to hold the ball longer. It isn't there, hold, and pressure. That's getting charged to the quarterback, but it's effectively coverage sacks translated to pressures. So when you do that, the numbers plummet. Like quarterbacks struggle massively more when they haven't got anywhere to go with the ball, as essentially determined by coverage, than when they just have somebody bearing down on them and they can react to that and do something with it.
Yeah, I mean, so that also goes down to, we've always said, like the stable measures of quarterback play, actually clean pocket versus pressure and all that stuff. And then if you have a guy like Derek Carr getting rid of the ball quickly and kind of protecting his offensive line and kind of being a little conservative, like if he's going to have 10% more clean dropbacks than, say, Daniel Jones, it's actually a lot easier to predict Derek Carr's performance year to year, because you've got 10% more clean pocket snaps, and that performance is going to be a lot more stable, which is why Daniel Jones or a Nick Foles or a guy that's willing to stand in there and make these plays and hold on to the ball a little bit longer and maybe invite pressure a little bit more, they're going to have a wider range of outcomes. But that does make a lot of sense, though, Sam, because if the quarterback is being charged with the pressure, it's either because there's not a play to happen there, to be made, or because the quarterback is, being bad on the play. And a lot of those could be fumbles as well once they invite the pressure to them. That's good. I like the way we track pressure, though, because that's important, right? That you can divvy up the credit properly and figure out, who's to blame for certain things.
So Timo's going to write a follow-up article, which I'll be really interested to see. He's basically going to dive into the data and answer the question that we've nibbled at a little bit, which is, can you predict these guys that skew sack heavy compared with pressure? My initial reaction is no. I don't know there's a way you can do that. Generally speaking, I think finishing pressure, essentially converting pressures into sacks, is not a skill. I think the reverse, like it can be a deficiency. Your friend that's cost you lunches, Brandon Graham, consistently will get less sacks than he does, than his pressure volume should determine.
I don't know if we have the data to test my theory on that.
Which is
just using those two guys when you hear it play out. So using Chandler Jones versus Brandon Graham, I would say Brandon Graham, he's got great hands, but he's more of like a burst, get to the edge, half man win type of guy, right? So like he has a lot of wins where he's still kind of engaged with the blocker. He'll get around him. He'll be like more of like what we call a half man win, but there's still enough contact between him and the tackle that he can get pushed past the pocket. This is like very specific, and again, it's tough to test, but that's how I picture Brandon Graham getting a bunch of his pressures. He wins in other ways, but like that's a big part of them. Whereas Chandler Jones doesn't win with burst. He wins straight up with technique. He's like it looks like he's playing kung fu out there. He's in like a kung fu battle sometimes. He uses his hands extremely well. And when he wins, It's like he doesn't have the defender on him anymore. He's got a clear path to the quarterback because he's actually stopping and using a little shake and a shutter, all these, I won't act it out, but he's putting a more of a move on. And when he wins. And then when you have the clean line to the quarterback, he's going to sack.
So
it's my theory.
Generally speaking, pass rushers convert pressure into sacks on 15% of their time, right? 15 is the number. Yep. There are players that consistently skew either side of that, but they're kind of rare and they're unusual. So I think in particular, there are players that consistently skew below it. The ones that skew above it are usually a sample size thing. Like when you get into big guys that generate a lot of pressure and skew sack heavy are really, really rare. which I think is my overall point and why I suspect that when Timo dives into all the data, the answer will be you can't predict those guys because it's down to coverage and it's down to the quarterbacks and it's down to all the other factors at play. Those are the things that essentially dictate whether the pressure will become a sack, not whether the guy is like a finisher. Brandon Graham is one of the players that's consistently skewed below. Brian Robinson for the Vikings was always another one. Here's my counter to your point, though, with Brandon Graham. Guess a player that skews below. Now, I looked at the last 10 years of data, so I'm chopping out a few years of his career, but the last decade, guess a player that you would not expect to, who skews low on sacks versus pressure.
On an edge? As an edge?
Yes.
Von Miller.
Dwight Freeney.
Oh,
right.
Theory gone.
Right. So Dwight Freeney for the last decade.
Oh, wait, you said
low.
He's like Graham. He's in the Graham bucket. No, that kind of, because a lot of his stuff is burst and half man wins and kind of getting around the corner too. He had a lot of clean wins too. Obviously, he was awesome. He had the spin move. He had the whole gamut. But he had a lot of like pure speed, like get to the top of the pocket wins. That's how there's guys who just get to the top of the pocket.
Give me a comp
quarterback to step up.
Give me a comp for Chandler Jones and it doesn't, that wins the same way.
JPP, maybe.
JPP.
Terrell Suggs.
Terrell Suggs. All right. Whoa.
I'd say more like power type. Chandler Jones
Terrell
is really
Suggs,
unique.
Terrell Suggs backs you up. He skews positive.
Look at this.
JPP a little bit, but more in the average.
Chandler Jones is very unique because, like I said, he's not a pure power player. I think he's just a hands winner over and over and over again. But then you have hands winners like our guy Henry Anderson. He's kind of like wins with his hands, but his balance is so bad. He more like stumbles into the top of the pocket instead of actually getting there.
The list of guys that can skew positive is actually really interesting. Like Chandler Jones is the biggest outlier that you can think of. He has the third highest percentage in the last decade in terms of skewing sack heavy. And so the average does it at 15%. He's done it at 21.4 for the decade, which is absurd because he also has like one of the highest numbers of pressures over that decade. There's two guys ahead of him, but not like Robert Mathis is number one, TJ Watt is number two. Those are both only marginally ahead of him, and they both have a fraction of the number of pressures, obviously, because they haven't been doing it as long in the decade. But the next sort of heavy pressure and sack heavy guy is Robert Quinn. And Quinn is another one of those pure speed guys that wins around the edge, wins with burst, wins with acceleration.
I would describe him more like a Freeney type when he was at his best. So yeah, it's tough to find trends. I mean, D Ford feels like the guy that doesn't convert high. He's another like get to the top of the pocket with speed guy and probably accumulates actual pressures, but maybe not as many sacks.
Nope, D Ford skews sack heavy. He's actually the other end of the spectrum. DeMarcus Ware skewed sack heavy, which is an interesting one because he's another guy that was absurdly productive, period, and skewed sack heavy. Julius Peppers also skewed sack heavy despite being insanely productive. So those guys are interesting and like really like there are some very, very good pass rushers that were able to skew sack heavy for an extended period of time, but they're absurdly rare. And I don't know that you can make the case that they are the reason that happened, right? Like I think, again, this is what Timo's going to end up diving into when he pulls the entire database to pieces, is we may end up coming to the realization that they faced an unusual slate of quarterbacks, or that they had an unusually good coverage unit behind them a lot of the time that helped them to skew sack heavy over a period of however many years.
Yeah. No, it's definitely an interesting deep dive. I think we've done a really good job at PFF of identifying the best pass rushers through the years through our system. And we've come to some pretty good conclusions, I think, through the years. And it's awesome to kind of see it move even forward, add more data to it, add some people who can do a little bit more with numbers than just you, Sam. You know, it's always helpful as well. No offense. I'm just saying we could all use a little bit of help.
I'm trying to find who the most prolific, most prolific and yet inadequate pass rusher is when it comes to converting pressures into sacks.
Is Brandon Graham the most Brandon Graham of anybody? Who's the most Brandon Graham of anybody here?
Probably if you're setting, like if you set the production threshold high enough, because he's got like almost 500 pressures in the last decade, which is one,
Right.
I think it's like 2 or 3 in the NFL. And yet he's one of the worst 5 edge rushers in football over that period. The other guy is Croy Bierman, Brooks Reed, Robert Ayers, and Eric Armstead, who half of his time wasn't really a true edge rusher in this sample size anyway.
I mean,
Then you get
those guys.
like, you get a lot of guys here who aren't true edge rushers, to be honest.
That's true too. You're not going to convert as much probably on the interior because Robert Ayers kicked inside, had a couple nice years there. Eric Armstead's moved around everywhere.
Right. And even just stylistically, like Lamar Houston is just above Brandon Graham. Lamar Houston was one of those like 280 pound sort of fat guy converted interior players, you know? So there's a lot of those guys. Interestingly, Fletcher Cox is down there in terms of interior guys, which backs up the idea that, look, I mean, I've said before, he's the best power pass rusher in the NFL. But by definition,
bull rushes,
right. By definition, when you're rushing with power, you're not going to be sacking at the end of it because you still have a guy, engaged at the time. That's pretty difficult to sack a guy doing that. So that at least makes some sense there.
Yeah, guys with a ton of bull rush pressure will not be good at that number. How about Chris Long? Is he a low converter? He also feels like I'm just looking at him right now, 65 pressures and 5 sacks one year. That's low. 64 and 5, 62 and 9.
Long
he had 3 years with double-digit sacks by our numbers, though.
13.5%. So he skews a little bit negative, but not massively.
Yeah, he had a pretty nice career rushing the passer. What an interesting case as one of those big, essentially 3-4 defensive ends, old school 3-4 defensive end in college, then becoming kind of like a speed pass rusher at the next level. The top of the pocket guy.
The interior list is pretty interesting in terms of skewing sack heavy, because this is the one that I think is completely random. Like whatever about edge rusher, there might be a skill involved somewhere in edge rushers being able to convert this, but they're just judging by the list of the guys that skew sack happy from interior players, I would say that this is completely random or the work of something else. The 2 best pass rushers in the NFL right now from an interior point of view, Aaron Donald and Chris Jones, are almost flat bang in the middle. They're 15.9% or 15.6% each. So they basically, that's how what you expect it to be. I will give you lunch for nothing if you can tell me who the number 1 interior player in the last decade is, who is skewed sack heavy.
That has converted sacks.
Yep.
Can I just glance at names real quick? Give me a minute. Pause.
Sure. Okay.
I'm going to pick one random year.
I'll give you his percentage. 19.7% of his pressure wound up as sacks. So essentially,
big sample size? 5. Is it a big sample size?
Big enough.
Derek Wolfe.
No. Can't find Derek Wolfe. I don't know where he is. I'll give you 2 and 3. Henry Melton.
Oh, of course.
Number 2, and Desmond Bryant, number 3.
Desmond, you're working from a small sample.
Oh, there. Derek Wolfe's number 4. You weren't crazy.
I used the method of going to premium stats, picking a random year, glancing quickly at the sack totals, and picking
who had
one
a lot
guy.
of sacks.
Yeah. So that was Derek Wolfe in 2016. So now if I go early decade and just see.
So I'm going to start giving you hints at which point the lunch becomes off the table because I'm helping you.
Antonio Smith.
He was a nose tackle.
Marcel Darius.
Yes, Marcel Darius.
Is lunch still on the table?
No, I told you. As soon as I started giving you hints, lunch went out the window.
Oh, I clicked on 2012, and there he was, 7 sacks, only 32 pressures. What a fun game our listeners are. Steve and Sam are just guessing stuff, and Steve's looking it up online, and you can't see it. This is June podcasting at its finest.
This is almost good as Mike Renner just reads you out a list of 50 things.
I know, right?
Did you do that on Thursday for old time's sake?
We should have, but
Mike, read this list.
There's Renner's got 2 or 3 really good fans that liked having him back. Just saying.
Well, they know they can get him at the 2-for-1 podcast, right?
I did everything I could to push him there. Listen, Renner's not coming back, so go see him somewhere else. We're not having him back. Maybe next draft season, or when I have a baby. I'm having another baby, right? Doesn't it feel like we were just here with me and my phone on my desk waiting for the call?
You know why that is?
I know why I'm having another baby. Yes.
No. You know why? It feels like it was just recently that happened.
Because it was 16 months ago.
Yeah, because it was just recently, and yet you're back there again like a lunatic.
Yeah. So we're due within the next 2 or 3 weeks. So I got the phone. She calls me from downstairs that she's going into labor. It's
easier this time at least to identify, you know, the false alarms than it was last time.
Much easier commute. Also, just so people know, people have to understand this too. In the PFF parking garage, I'm driving the massive minivan, right? And I got my own parking spot there, and then the boss, Chris, comes in with his Tesla, and he parks directly behind me all the time. Like, that's his spot, and there's not enough room for me to get out. I have to imagine if I had to rush to the hospital.
You have
and Chris
to do
is in the
Austin
office.
Powers. Yeah, you have to do that Austin Powers scene every time you want to maneuver the minivan out of the garage. And I keep coming in there, and there's like new evidence of, you know, bumper to immovable object collisions that have happened, which I'm pretty sure are all you just trying to get out.
Yeah, my door's got some issues right now from trying to get it. I mean, it's like a 28-point turn to try to get away. And it's like, obviously, I'm going to take the dent on my car rather than Chris's. I can't do that to the boss. Right. So I'm going to skew toward the pole rather than the Tesla. So imagine if we had to do that while Kelly's going into labor. So, yeah, the commute to downstairs should be a little bit cleaner if, you know, things happen on the podcast or just
imagine if you'd had to do that. You remember when we went to the Browns-Colts joint scrimmage, and it took us about 25 minutes to maneuver out past his car. Right. Legit, like 25 minutes of me guiding you doing the driving, me being like, all right, 6 inches this way, stop, full lock the other way. Like, again, full Austin Powers. And this was because he'd come in, jumped the car, and then like gone out to lunch or something. So
he just went out. We couldn't ask him to move it.
There. We couldn't move it. It was just there, and we had to leave and drive to Indy. So it took us 25 minutes maneuvering to get this thing out past the Tesla.
Yeah. So anyway, we don't have to deal with that. I'm not at the office. My wife doesn't have to give me the old get home immediately. It's just get downstairs immediately if needed. So let's be aware over the next few weeks. You might have your own opportunity for a solo podcast, or you could bring on a special guest like I did. Never know.
Okay.
All right.
I should start. I should draw up a short list. I should have like a list of, you know, people that I want to last minute call in to a Steve sub.
Who would be your guy? Like Ben Stockwell?
We could bring back Ben, old school, you know, dive back into the archives.
That's what I did last year. Remember, you were away last year. I brought Ben on for a little bit. Yeah.
Ben would be good. I also think there'd be some mileage in getting Bruce on.
Oh,
I just want stories from Bruce. I just want comedy stories from Bruce.
That's true.
Like, he's got some
Jamarcus Russell one.
He dropped that out on one of the cocktail hour videos that we do, but we just get Bruce talking about Jamarcus for hours. That's worth it in and of itself.
That's the title. Bruce Gradkowski tells Jamarcus Russell stories, and that's it.
Yes,
it's going to be the most listened to, most downloaded podcast in our history. So anyway, thank you guys for tuning in. Go check out Sam's article and then Timo's follow-up article over at pff.com. Big things coming next week is, I mean, it's like fantasy season starting next week. Football season for us at PFF. It never really ends, but it actually cranks back up starting next week. So get to pff.com, get your Edge or Elite package, and get ready for the season that's going to happen. I'm very optimistic that it's all going to happen, and it's going to be wonderful. So thanks for tuning in. We will be back Thursday, a little TBD on what it's looking like. But either way, there's a podcast on Thursday. So we will talk to you guys then.